honor and delight to be here today with Rabbi Ira Stone, who is Rabbi Emeritus and Rosh Yeshiva of the Center for Contemporary Mussar. Thank you for taking time to talk.
Pleasure to be here.
So our topic today is the Kabbalistic roots of Mussar. I have enjoyed your works on Mussar for some time and was really one of my entry points into what has been some of the most transformative Torah I know, so thank you for that. So when I think of major innovations in modernity in the Jewish world, the first two that come to mind, even prior to denominations, one, of course, is Chassidut, because it makes Kabbalah accessible to the masses, and also is Mussar. What I think of as so radical of those two is that they are moving from the primary religious activity of being Gemara study. Right? Talmud study was the primary religious activity among the elite, and this moves into the masses a little bit more, away from just Talmud study, although they valued that, into Chassidut, piety and prayer, and into Mussar of ethical and spiritual development. And of course, Chassidut being what makes Kabbalah more accessible. And so Mussar is an incredibly radical innovation, and yet when you learn the text, they're not necessarily so radical. But so I guess the first question I want to start with is, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, the founder of the Mussar movement, what was his relationship to Kabbalah? Is this, for him, a totally separate movement from Chassidut, or is this in some way linked? And how much Kabbalah did he know and attempt to integrate or not?
Okay, well, thanks. It's a great question. Salanter, so this is a question in academic circles. The two primary scholars of the Mussar movement, contemporary academics, are Hillel Goldberg and Emanuel Etkes. And Etkes suggests that Salanter eschewed Kabbalah. He rejected it. And Hillel Goldberg makes the case that that's probably not true, but neither of them have a lot of proof. So the question is, what was going on at the time that would take Rabbi Salanter away from expressing Mussar within a Kabbalistic framework? And it becomes particularly an interesting question when one recognizes that though there is no explicit Kabbalistic teaching in Salanter's Mussar, every single Mussar text that's ever been written, as far as I know, has been written by a consummate Kabbalist. So the question is, why did Salanter separate Mussar from its roots in Kabbalah? And I can talk a little bit about why Mussar's roots are in Kabbalah when we get to it. But the simple question, in my view, is answered in two ways. Salanter's audience were Lithuanian young Jews who were on the brink of fleeing Judaism in order to take advantages of the fruit of secular life. The Enlightenment, the Haskalah, was coming into Lithuania. And so contrary to some of the earlier histories that say that Mussar was actually aimed as an alternative to Chassidut, it was more an alternative to secularism. And in that regard, Chassidut and Kabbalah in general, it seems to me, appeared to Rav Salanter as being too mystifying, too superstitious, too dependent on non-rational ways of thinking. And I think he believed it would turn off, to use our expression, the young Jews who were being influenced by the rational movement. So he wanted to present Mussar as a kind of quintessentially Jewish rational movement, and therefore avoided Kabbalah in general, and in particular avoided Chassidut because it was an enthusiasm that he viewed as being antithetical to serious ethical achievement. That if one focused mostly on trying to access God through mystical formulations, one tended to overlook one's relationship with people.
Great. So why might one think that there was or was not a relationship between Mussar and Kabbalah?
Well, I think it's primarily because of what Salanter did. I mean, I think up until Salanter's time, the Mussar and Kabbalah would have been seen as being, born from the same bed. I mean, they lived together. Mussar functioned as the practical preliminary to doing higher spiritual work.
Okay, so now we understand a little bit better why it wouldn't explicitly use the language of Kabbalah and would distance itself from such mystical practices. But how and why is Mussar actually rooted in Kabbalah?
Okay, so it's a little hard to demonstrate this
Yes.
in a very short time, but
Yeah.
but I'll sort of repeat what I said and maybe deepen it a little bit. The Kabbalah as a literature is potentially destabilizing. Primarily because I believe one of the most important, perhaps the most important message of Kabbalah is that the creative energy of the universe descends in two ways. First is through the sphirot that create the material world. First the spiritual world, then the material world. But at the same time, particularly in the Kabbalah of Lithuania, going back to the Gaon of Vilna, that energy does a kind of a end run and goes directly into human beings, who are then imbued with the power to bring order to this spherotic universe. So in a certain sense, Kabbalah teaches that everything in the universe depends on human beings. And in a certain sense, that's a very heady and intoxicating power. And so you might conclude that since human beings really have taken on the role of God in the universe, which some Kabbalistic texts say almost explicitly, then human beings are God. And as we all know, power corrupts, and extreme power corrupts extremely. Secondly, much of the language of Kabbalistic texts is sexual. And so there's a kind of potential destabilizing element in that literature as well. If one does not first work at stabilizing and, in fact, perfecting one's ethical norms, then the Kabbalistic literature is dangerous. And so the Kabbalists almost invariably included in their Kabbalistic works prefaces of various kinds, which were aimed at first perfecting your midot so that you could then be open and not be bowled over, so to speak, by the secrets that you were going to learn through Kabbalah. And so that's exactly how the whole genre of Mussar developed as a kind of prelude to doing Kabbalistic speculation. Plenty of examples of that. You have Tomar Devorah by Rabbi Cordovero. You have Mesilat Yesharim by Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutzato. Lutzato wrote Mesilat Yesharim when he was not allowed to write Kabbalah, and he wrote it as a kind of preface to his Kabbalah. Cordovero included Tomar Devorah as a kind of preface to his larger Kabbalistic work. I think it was a well-accepted premise that if you didn't work on your midot, you were not permitted to enter into the pardes, so to speak, of Kabbalistic speculation. So it made perfect sense that Kabbalah and Mussar grew up together. And then we have Rav Salanter, in the 19th century, who I think is both reacting to the proliferation of Kabbalistic knowledge to people who are not ready for it, which he opposes, and secondly, the potential, I don't know what the right word is, but the potential delegitimatization of Mussar if it is tainted by the kind of mysticism and irrationalism that Kabbalah represented.
Wonderful. So why does it make a difference if there are Kabbalistic roots to the Mussar movement at all? What is that? What are the implications?
Well, I think they're profound. I think that they answer many questions, particularly for the contemporary Mussar movement. The way Mussar is generally presented in the contemporary mode is that it is really as a kind of almost self-help template.
That's right.
And it really isn't
Right.
grounded in religious behavior and religious thought. I think recognizing and getting to know some of the Kabbalistic roots of Mussar begins to create an energy for integrating Jewish practice, Torah in general, with Mussar, or I should say reintegrating it, because certainly Salanter believed in the observance of mitzvot and believed in the study of Torah, but I think he lacked a way of connecting that to Mussar when he took the Kabbalistic framework away. So I think for contemporary Jews, asking themselves, well, if I follow Mussar, it makes me a better person, but does being a better person have any relationship to being a better Jew? And I think that the Kabbalistic framework allows for us to start to answer that question more positively.
So one might have thought the movements were exactly the opposite, that Kabbalah or Chassidut really starts with God to some degree, and Mussar starts with self. That Kabbalah or Chassidut is about avodas Hashem, serving God, whereas Mussar can be just, like you said, a self-help, kind of self-improvement, which of course is on an ethical project very important. But I think to put its religious roots back in, it seems clear to me from any Mussar I've learned that avodat Hashem is still the goal, sort of a service of God.
Exactly, and it goes both ways.
Yeah.
Understanding Chassidut as avodat Hashem, absent any relationship to human beings, is as illegitimate as understanding Mussar as being involved with relationships with other people and not with avodat Hashem. The two become synonymous. They were synonymous. That's how they were born. The revolutionary insight, it seems to me, of Kabbalah to begin with, is that the true avodat Hashem is the love of one's neighbor. And in fact, I would take it back long before the Kabbalah. Of course, that's the Torah's main insight. That is, avodat kodesh is initially occurs within the book of Leviticus, right? It's all about avodat Hashem. And yet, at the center of the book of Leviticus is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. That's not an accident.
Yeah, right. I think it's attributed to the Baal Shem Tov, founder of Chassidut, of course, that before we say Shema and feel ourselves with love for our Creator, we should feel love for those around us, that it would be hypocritical and misaligned to not have that relational piece. And so if someone asks me what's the most central source for Jewish ethics, I'd probably say halachta b'drachav, that we should emulate God's ways, imitat Yodeh. And so the question is, to be like God, what does that look like? And then there Mussar gives us the tools to do that. So it is, with the right kavanah, with the right intentionality, a religious project to work on oneself when one has in mind what would it look like to be godlike.
Right, I mean, it gives religion a raison d'etre.
Yeah.
Right? So instead of religion being relegated to the realm of meaningless ritual,
Exactly, right.
it becomes a profoundly commanding way of taking on the responsibility of acting like God in the world. And that's really what it's all about. And I should say, just to be clear, there are plenty of really important Mussar works that come out of the Hasidic world.
Yeah.
So Salanter's antipathy toward Chassidut, it doesn't mean he was necessarily correct.
Right.
In his time and in his place, particularly, as I said, I think because of the growth of secularism, he made a strategic decision that in order to attract the young people who were attracted to rationalism and secularism, he needed to make sure that his Mussar did not degenerate into some kind of religious mumbo-jumbo. But I think that we live in a very different time. And in fact, I think that for us, the need is to somehow take this ethical imperative, which almost everyone recognizes. Doesn't matter whether you're Jewish or not Jewish, doesn't matter whether you're observant or not observant. There's nobody's going to argue with you about being a good person is the central task of being a human being. But if you want to ask the question, how do you be a good person in a religious context, then I think you have to start to reconnect the context out of which Mussar came.
Great. So I would close with two disclaimers and want to confirm if you agree with me. First is that for those who don't embrace a traditional view of God, although there's many different traditional views of God, one who has more of an agnostic relationship, that in fact Mussar can be an important channel into Jewish practice. And secondly, that I don't think it's a dichotomy that of, serving God versus self-help, that actually part of this Avodat Hashem, this practice, should bring life benefits. Cultivating simcha, joy in our lives, strengthening relationships, right? Our midot, our character traits, should in fact bring a more meaningful life. And so I think that those who do feel attracted to a self-help kind of world, although that's certainly not exactly what the Mussar movement is, there is some of that leaning towards, improving your life, cultivating joy, and these types of things. Do you agree with those two?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the real quest is to get beyond those dichotomies altogether.
Right.
That this is a really this is an Enlightenment foisted dichotomy between so-called religion and so-called secular ethics. I think in the real world, the ethical and the spiritual are almost synonymous.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for this.
You
can check out Rabbi Stone's writings online and the Center for Contemporary Mussar. Have a great day.